Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
Doing great today, Tim. We have a couple of very good friends coming up that I'm sure our audience will enjoy, and I hope our audience is doing well on this fine day in January. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for asking. And
You're welcome.
I'm excited to speak with our two guests today. Of course, it is Suave from the hit podcast Suave and the other hit podcast Death by Incarceration. He is on with his friend and co-host Kevin McCracken. You can find out everything they do on Death by Incarceration at deathbyincarcerationpodcast.com. But Lance, today we're here to discuss the Camp Hill Prison Riot with these two gentlemen.
And why is this relevant to Suave and to Kevin? Well, Suave was in the prison on October 25th, 1989, when this riot took place. And I'm sorry, I need to make a correction. Pulitzer Prize winner Suave Gonzalez was in this prison on October 25th, 1989, when this riot took place in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania, which resulted in the injury of 69 staff members, 41 inmates, and the entire place was pretty much trashed and burned to the point of significant disrepair. And to hear Suave's experience in the prison is not only fascinating, it's kind of horrific when he describes how it all started. How the misconception is that prisoners started this, but that's not the case at all. And their show, Death by Incarceration, is going to be going into probably an 8-part series dedicated specifically to this prison riot.
I can't wait. I heard the first part, and it is a fascinating story, and especially hearing it directly from Suave adds an extra layer of authenticity.
Tim, you mentioned the website. You can also follow them on Twitter at DB Incarceration and Instagram at Death by Incarceration, and you'll be able to stay up to date on the releases of these 8 episodes, which should be starting mid to late February.
I can't wait. In the meantime, you can follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. And if you want to hear ad-free versions of Crawlspace, you can now subscribe to Crawlspace Premium via Apple Podcasts. It's just $4.99 a month. And if you don't have Apple, you can subscribe via Supporting Cast at crawlspace.supportingcast.fm.
Oh, and just a quick heads up, we don't get into this episode the way we get into other Crawlspace episodes where Tim immediately introduces the guest. There was a moment that happened right beforehand that was so endearing that it had to stay in. 20 seconds of that, then we get into the conversation. But first, we need to break for a sponsor.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Here we go.
There you are.
Here we go. They can't stop me, man.
Great.
Even the internet can't stop you.
Yeah.
Yo, even the internet can't stop Suave, man. They can't. Undefeated, man. Undefeated. 2-0.
Well, welcome to the podcast, Suave Gonzalez and Kevin McCracken of Death by Incarceration. How are you both doing today?
The dynamic duo is back. We back. So wrapping up the years with good news, bad news, and some more news that we created. So 2023, all podcasters better be aware. Death by Incarceration is back in full effect.
We definitely have a lot going on. I'm happy to put 2022 in my rearview mirror, to be honest. It's been a weird year. You know, just to give the highlights, we're going to be interviewing Chesa Bodine. His first full interview after his recall election is going to be with Death by Incarceration. That'll be in January. We're finishing up a podcast documentary on the Camp Hill Riot in SCI Camp Hill in Pennsylvania in 1989 that Suave was actually a prisoner in that facility during the time of. You guys have heard the little preview intro episode of that. That's a labor of love. That's basically just us doing that as our own kind of venture. We've got some amazing people involved. Spencer that did Injustice with Lisa for a couple seasons, Lisa Spees, and a couple of guys that I know that have worked on Grammy-winning records and Billboard Top 10 albums as well. So we've got our own music production going on. It's quite an undertaking. I've never done anything quite like this. So
and of course they got the Pulitzer Prize winner too. So don't miss that out, Brett.
Yeah, exactly. So before we look ahead to 2023, I want to stop and speak about Death by Incarceration, and I want to hear about your Pulitzer as well, Suave. So let's hear about these podcasts. What have you been doing on Death by Incarceration? What is the show? And then Suave, I would love to hear about Suave and your Pulitzer.
Start it off, Cap.
The show is really a hard look at prison policy in the U.S. Season 1 was kind of an intro to the show. Season 2 was really about women. We've been filling in the last few months with short interviews, doing like multi-interview series where we've got 2 or 3 people that we're interviewing. And we're starting to kind of get a better picture of what we want to do going forward. We've got a partner now that's a journalist. She writes for Open Campus Media, and her beat is higher education in prison. She and Suave collaborated on an interview that I actually did the recording and interview on with Rasan Thomas from Ear Hustle. That episode got a link posted on Slate magazine along with the article. So people are starting to take notice of not, I think, just our kind of the shocking reality of the prison system, but that we actually have some really great interviews and people who know what they're talking about on the show. I mean, I think the Suave and Rasan conversation is a prime example of that. These are 2 guys that had a ton of experience dealing with higher education in prison. They both have degrees now. Suave's out, Rasan's getting out early next year. So hopefully we're going to look for some more collaborations on that. But having that journalistic piece in our with Charlotte West is huge for us. She'll say, is that statement true? So we're not going to get ourselves into trouble just shooting from the hip all the time. It's been an amazing partnership so far. Her and I are working on something that's going to be a multimedia where we're interviewing former juvenile lifers and current juvenile lifers about their experience with higher education. Our man Suave here is going to paint a portrait of each of them. We're then going to do a gallery opening. We'll update it to new technology, but we'll have a QR code under every painting so you can listen to that person's like 10-minute story about what their educational experience was. You'd rent the headphones from the museum and be able to hear about the painting. We're going to actually give it to people for free, no rental. They can just listen to it on their iPhone or Android. Cool stuff.
On my behalf, Pulitzer Prize, more invitations, more notoriety for the show. I think that people taking us more serious now because they're like, wow, you want a Pulitzer? And I'm like, yeah, they don't give them out. They're not M&Ms.
Yep.
They don't give them out.
And, whoa. Tim and I just got 2 each last week.
Okay. But to me, it's like this. To be the first former juvenile lifer in America to win a Pulitzer Award, drive the message home that criminal justice reform is needed, that the message is being heard, and now we have a platform that we could take this to the pinnacle of journalism. We no longer doing podcasts just for fun. I understand that when Kevin and I first got into this, our first season, we had a mission. And we just went at it. We didn't know what we was doing. We was just passionate about what we was doing. Now we're more seasoned. Now we know that when we bring somebody on the show, we vetting that person. We're not just shooting from the hip. We addressing topics that could compete with the highest of journalism in the country. And that's what we want to do. In 2023, we have a lot of big surprises, some we can't talk about right now. But one of them is we will be doing live radio, Kevin and I. We're going to do Friday nights, live radio on the internet, So that's one of the surprises. We moving up in the world like the Jeffersons, right? But at the same time, we want people to understand that we're not going to stop. We still driven by the message that we created, and we stand on it, which is death by incarceration. We must abolish all life sentences across America. We must protect the right of juveniles, and we must fight for those that are still behind that are innocent. We must fight for our missing kids in our community. So we come in full force, nonstop. Death by incarceration, DBI. So for those that's hearing it, subscribe, like, and press that button.
Smash that button. And both of you said independently that you're trying to get away from the shooting from the hip style. And you said, Kevin, so we don't get into trouble or something like that?
Kevin and I we know our subject. We know our subject. We know our subject a little too much. So we do some studies on them and just ask questions that we probably shouldn't be asking on the air. So we're going to be professionals about it. We don't want people to be scared of death by incarceration and think if I go to the show, they're going to put me in the hot chair. We want people to feel comfortable. We still going to ask the hard questions. We still going to make sure that you leave here with an experience, but we want you to come back.
Yeah, I could see that. You keep a guest in the hot seat for the entire time. It might be uncomfortable to come back. But hey, you guys are doing the work that needs to be done. You're asking hard questions. And I'm wondering if you put it to John Fetterman about his hoodies, what's going on there? Maybe that's not the hardest subject, but
John Fetterman is coming back on the show. I guarantee you that. He's a friend of the show. We also have Sherelle Parker. She's coming on the show. She's running for mayor of Philadelphia. I think death by incarceration has created a platform where politicians feel they could come on our show and just campaign. That's not the case. That's not the case. If you're coming on our show, that means you are ready to play hardball. But we want to be respectful, because we could just say, nah, you ain't coming on the show with that shit. But we understand what you're saying, but this is our view. Can you answer this question in a respectful manner? We've taken the more journalistic approach this season to see how it works. If not, me and Kev still going to be on the air disagreeing. Y'all still going to get Kevin and Suave fighting a little bit. Again, that's what makes death by incarceration, that we could come on the show and express our view and still be homie after that. Right, Kev?
Agreed.
Tim brought up Fetterman, and that led me to just a randomish type question. What did you make of the elections that happened last month?
I mean, you want my honest opinion?
Please.
I don't believe in politicians, period. It's the lesser of two evils, right? And what we saw was Dr. Oz using the old Ronald Reagan, Bush tactic where hard criminals are being released into society. You saw that a lot in that campaign, right? But at the same time, do you blame him? No, because Fetterman did the same thing. He just did it reverse. Fetterman knew he was going to run. He knew he was going to run. So what he did, he aligned himself with formerly incarcerated. Why? The city of Philadelphia has 255,000 formerly incarcerated people that have voting power. What politician do not want to align themselves with that? If us putting Krasner in office is not proof that we have power, then I don't know what to tell you. So Fetterman lined himself up with these guys because he knew that was the only way he was going to win that. If he lose Philadelphia, he don't win, period. That's why he campaigned in Philly. That's why I think, personally, he released like 52 lifers, individuals that were serving life, which I applaud him for that. But we talking about a population of 5,000 people, 5,000 lifers. 54 is not enough. Why not pass a bill that allowed these brothers and sisters to go up for parole? Let's do that. Now, if you would have done that, then I wouldn't be like, he's the real deal. We're going to let 54 people out of 5,000. That's not enough for me. So I think the elections was a testament that when you have voting power and you use it, you can vote your candidate in. And we show that Philadelphia stand up for John Fetterman. They put him in office. They put Krasner in office twice. The power of voting. That's what we saw.
I think it proved that a majority of the country still think Trump's a clown too. That's just my honest opinion about that situation. So many things that are wrong with our electoral system and a lot of the candidates that we have. I mean, look at what happened in San Francisco this last year. We recalled 3 board members and the district attorney. Like, how does that happen?
It happens because people feel certain people's votes don't matter. They using the legislative bodies as a scapegoat to disenfranchise people. And that's what they're doing in Philadelphia. They're trying to get Krasner out. So now the legislators are introducing a bill to get him out because they think that Krasner is responsible for every homicide that happened in the city. Are you kidding me? If I walk down the steps at my 3rd floor studio, Krasner's getting the blame and fall. If I fall down them steps, Krasner's getting the blame. I mean, so what I'm saying to the people is it's time to wake up, America. It's time to decide who you really want in office. It's time to tell these trunksters, like, man, we done with that. We got to get past that. Because if I'm telling my people, you could come out and vote, how the heck a legislative body is going to come back and say, well, y'all voted for the wrong person. That's not the person we want. That is some BS. That's some BS. And that's what we saw in San Francisco. They voted Chester out, but what happened? What happened, Cap? Crime is still up. The lady that replaced them fired everybody and don't know what to do. We should be impeaching her. But no, we satisfied with that because she's going to say the city. What city? She can't stop crime. The district attorney is not responsible for the rise of crimes in no city. If anybody that know law understand that it starts with the court system and the judges. It starts with the lying cops. If the cops stop being so corrupt, trumping up charges on people and lying on people, maybe the charges that they arrest a person for would stick. But since they always want to be extra, this is what happened. We can't charge that person up because you just lied on 4 or 5 different statements. So we got to throw that case out, even if the person is guilty. So to blame the district attorney and one person is crazy.
Well, tell us about what you've got cooking with the Camp Hill Prison Riot.
Well, I think first and foremost, Suave has been wanting to tell this story for a long time. He was in Camp Hill in 1989 when this riot went down. Most of the narrative that has been slanted towards the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania. So it basically they've been telling the staff stories. Right. There's an entire storytelling page on the Department of Corrections website about this riot. And every single person on that page was either a CO or an administrator or worked for the Department of Corrections in some way. There's no contrasting voices there. And, we're not here to say that the men were good to go on doing this either, but there's another side to this story. And it was one of the most big riots in history of the country in terms of damage. They burnt 14 buildings to the ground. They took COs hostage at this riot. There was a couple of men shot by the state police. For some miraculous reason, nobody died, but it's a really intense story about what can happen when you simultaneously overcrowd a prison and start taking away privileges at the same time. You're mixing different classifications of men in one place. That prison, it was started as like a boys' reformatory school. It turned into a prison, and it was a medium security. And then they started doing all their classifications there. So it turned into a max almost overnight. It was just a hot mess. It's actually become sort of a textbook on how not to manage prison policies and riots throughout the country.
And not only that, Camp Hill, and I'm not going to reveal too much because I want you to hear it. You will see that Camp Hill gave birth to what is known today as Supermax prisons and hold in solitary confinement. Before Camp Hill, they only had maybe 3 Supermax, which was the Twin Towers, but they called the Twin Towers Red Onions, and Virginia, Florence, Colorado was being built. So they really didn't have a whole lot of Supermax holes across the country. After Camp Hill, you saw the explosion of that. And because of Camp Hill, we saw at least 15 other prisons go up in PA. The DOC have their narrative, but they left a lot of stuff out, such as none of the guards got killed because certain inmates saved them. See, they forgot to tell that part. That's the part that they forgot. They made it sound like everybody in there was a savage, everybody in there was animal and burning prisons. Camp Hill was a riot designed by guards. The guards, yes, the COs, designed that riot because they were mad at the administration, the way they was getting treated. So it was almost like, if we do this, these guys are going to riot, and in turns, we're going to get what we want. That's what you would see in the podcast. I mean, it's so good that I tell Kev, you outdid yourself, McCracken.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor. Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Without giving away too much, you forwarded Tim and I the introductory episode. It's phenomenal. I don't want to give away too much. Is there any way you can give us a little background as to when you were in Camp Hill? What was it like in the beginning stages for you when you realized that a riot was about to take place?
It was hell on earth. I just finished doing a bunch of time in solitary confinement. I get to the population, you see the tension, you hear it, and you tell yourself oh my God, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here for 2 reasons. And the reason is I don't want to get caught up because riots are not good. They never end good. I was a 19, 20-year-old kid. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to get caught up locked in the cell. You can't get caught up locked in the cell. But it was scary. It's something that I always said, and I think you probably hear me say it in the podcast. A riot, they are horrific because they create chaos, and then amongst that chaos, a lot of stuff come out. Abuse, murder. What the COs say don't tell you is that, yes, nobody got killed in the Camp Hill riot, but the guards did murder a prisoner when he got shipped to another prison, and they thought that bus was the leaders of the riot. When they shipped that prisoner from Camp Hill to SCI Gratisville, the guards was waiting for him off of the bus, and they whipped everybody's ass. They killed that guy that was infected with HIV. They put a baton up his anus and killed him and left him in the cell killed, and guards got arrested for that. See, they don't tell you that, but we will. So, so the podcast is like the real deal. And we wanted to be fair. We just didn't want to tell our story from the prisoner's perspective. So we contacted the DOC. And the DOC was so generous to death by incarceration, and especially Spencer Daniel, that they said, oh, yeah, we work with y'all. We give y'all the tapes. We give you statements. Only in America, bro. Only in America. They basically gave us an interview till they realized who Suave Gonzalez was. Then it was like, oh, we don't want to talk to you no more.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. They gave us this information.
I guess I'm a little lost. So they were going to cooperate. They were going to take part in it. And then they found out it was you. And they were like, no.
I think they found out that these people are putting a project together that's not going to look good for us. But, it happens. It happens. But it's too late because we already got the information and we ain't giving it back.
Oh, good. Okay. So it's not like they demanded you return the information or any recordings or anything like that.
No, we got to keep that.
The CO and staff interviews are all on a state website and released as public domain. There's no restrictions at all. No fine print, no nothing. So that all of that information belongs to the public now.
Suave, I think you mentioned Spencer. I think you both mentioned Spencer Daniels. He's part of the team here that is putting together this podcast docuseries. Who else is on your team?
Nathaniel Walsh, Charlotte West. So Patrick Sexton he basically puts all the files together for Nathan, and then Nathan adds the soundscaping on it with the music. So Spencer and I have been working on putting the episodes together, writing, and then Charlotte comes in and makes us look like we're in junior high. She's an incredible writer and editor. Yeah, so Charlotte's amazing. She's really working hard. So we obviously have a lot going on this starting in January. It's going to be totally bonkers. We're going to post the Chesa interview that we did previously as a little teaser for our new interview with him in January. And then we'll get some of the interviews done with the juvenile lifers. We'll get some of those out. Those will be similar to the series we just did at Reform Alliance. 2 to 3 interviews per episode. So there'll be 10 to 15 minutes per interview, essentially them telling their story about what it was like to try to get an education in prison.
Sounds pretty incredible. With the Camp Hill episodes, how many do you plan on releasing? And do you plan on going into other prison riots and talking to people who are involved with those and administrators, prisoners? Is this going to be something that continues on?
Right now we're trying to cover this Camp Hill. It's probably going to be like 7 to 8 episodes. That's it. It's going to be a doc series. But no, we're not there of covering other prison riots. But I don't think people understand the significance that Camp Hill had, how it changed correction across the border. Because Camp Hill, you ask any warden across the border, they tell you about Camp Hill and how it's been used. Or it's still used for training across the border. Sometimes that kind of history get lost because people don't be searching for. So we just want to remind the people like, yo, cannot treat people like animals. You cannot get the Ku Klux Klan to serve as prison guards and expect peaceful results. You can't do it. It's not going to work. And that's what Camp Hill was doing. Like I said, we don't want to bring a story that's just one-sided. That's why we reached out to former correctional. We cutting it down the line even. However it come out, it's going to be even. So nobody would say, well, you sided with these people. We're not siding. We're just putting out information and educating the public because correction, it's a topic of everyday American conversation. Every city you go got 4 or 5 prisons. Everywhere you look, these prisons are looking so fly now that some of them are disguised as college campuses. They look like college campuses. So why not know about what's going on in these prisons? A Camp Hill could happen anywhere in America. anywhere. It's just sad that it happened in PA and that I was caught up in that. But at the end of the day, it's about human rights. It's about why these guys felt the way they felt. Why the guards felt the need to treat the prisoners the way they were. And when you hear that the guards was mad at the administration, so they knew the riot was coming, so a lot of them just called off. It's almost like I left my colleague behind. Like it's almost like I left my soldier behind because the commander got me pissed off. It's almost something like that. And it's a shame. It's a shame because Camp Hill could have been prevented.
Well, how did the riot start?
Oh, I can't reveal too much, but I'll tell you a little bit. It started with the DOC changing policies because 2 years prior, there was an incident where a prisoner got into an altercation with 2 guards. Them guards ended up getting fired. That didn't sit well with the rest of the guards. So unable for them to get back at the DOC, they said, you know what, we're going to slack up. We know a riot's coming, so we're not going to be involved. It's ironic that a number of guards called off that day and didn't show up to work because they knew it was coming. There's no way in the world that Camp Hill could have been prevented at that point after what the DOC was doing, mistreating people, taking little privileges that guys had, the only thing that guys had in the prison. So, it was almost like oppression. They put so much pressure, then the pipes just bust.
What are some examples of the privileges that they were taking away from prisoners?
Medication, which is if I ever got sick, I couldn't go to medication. I had to wait 2 weeks. 2 weeks to go see a doctor to get a Tylenol for my headache. Who the fuck would have known if I had a tumor? Oh my God, if I had a tumor, I probably would have died. So, those little samples, you can't take a hot shower because there's no showers. Showers was always cold or broken. So you had to walk from one cell block in the middle of winter outside in your slippers because you wasn't allowed to wear nothing else to walk down to a gym and take a shower. Or your cells was always cold, so you had to get plastic bags and duct tape and try to cover that hold up. Or you had to put your hand out of your cell so the CO could open your cell so you could go take a dump in somebody else's cell because your toilet was clogged up. It's them kind of conditions that create riots.
And for the most part, the people who are in charge, the guards, the administrative staff, they're the ones that are allowing this to happen for the sole purpose to have that spark in the powder keg, and then the riot happens.
Yeah, because a riot happens, what happens? More resources are given to that prison. They get to do what they want to do, to build what they want to build. And, but at the end, we talking about human lives. We talking about the lives of prisoners, the lives of guards, because they are human beings. Somebody's going to get hurt in a riot, whether it's prisoners or guards. Somebody's going to get hurt. So I'm not willing to sacrifice my soldiers if I was in that position. But that's what Camp Hill did. They sacrificed their soldiers. They started that riot. The prisoners didn't start that riot. The administration in Camp Hill started that riot.
And some of the correctional officers were openly racist. Is that right?
Oh, my God. You had Ku Klux Klans members with sheets patrolling the towers at nighttime. You had guards with Nazi tattoos in their hands. You had guards that would bluntly use the N-word. If you hear the first episode, you would get it. You just can't talk to somebody like that. And I'm not just talking about people of color. I'm not just talking against blacks and Hispanics. You had white guards that used to call other white inmates snow bunnies. And if a guard in prison call you a snow bunny, you know what he's calling you? He's really saying that you are a sex slave for a person of color. That's what he's really telling you in the prison. And when a guard saw me and you hanging together, or we were cellmates, automatically they think that you was my snow bunny. What type of stuff is that to treat a person? So they created that racial tension in the jail. They created that.
They had stationery in the offices that said White Hill on it.
Well, to this day, a lot of the White Hill stamps still exist. If you go to Camp Hill, they front gate, it still say White Hill. And it's like you keep putting pressure, but then you don't want nothing to bust. And they love to say that it was blacks and Hispanics, they burned the jail down. But if you look at the number of people that were charged, the number of people that were charged. There were more white guys charged than anybody else. And they only was charging the white guys, not because they was part of the riot, but because they was standing up with the blacks. And that was their payback for standing up with the blacks. Oh, you want to stand up with them? We're going to charge you up. And that's how they was doing it.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
When you said that they were saying that this was started by black men and Hispanic men, who's they? Is that the prison guards, or is that how the media portrayed it? Or
Well, the
both?
media and the administration, they said that the riot started with the Nation of Islam, right? Which is totally a lie. And then to justify that, you know, they said the Nation of Islam, there's a racist group. No, they wasn't. No, they wasn't. You know, the bottom line is that Camp Hill used a few people, such as Reginald McFadden, which is a prisoner that's right now in New York, serving a couple of life sentences because he was one of the biggest snitch that Camp Hill used throughout the riot. And he testified on a bunch of people, lied on a bunch of people. So they commuted his sentence from life. They let him go home. Guess what he do when he go home? He commit the same exact crime that he was in jail for in 1969. He went and murdered and raped a few women in New York, got caught. Now he's in jail for the rest of his life in New York. Reginald McFadden. And that was the day that the jail decided we're not going to commute no lifers no more. So that's why you saw that dry spell in PA when no lifers was being commuted. It was because of the Reginald McFadden case that came out of the Camp Hill. So the Camp Hill riot changed the way the legislators dealt with lifers in totality in the state. After that riot, after they let Reginald McFadden out, no lifer was commuted till John Fetterman came in office. And we still feeling that effect today because in order for you to get commuted, you need all 5 votes. Before Camp Hill, you only needed 3 votes to get out. You know, it has a whole lot of effect that a lot of people don't know in law.
One of the big things that we talked about and is talked about both by former prisoners there and the staff is the removal of Family Day. So they had so many lifers in that prison that only got 1 visit a year, which was these extended 4-hour visits on what they called Family Day, where their families would drive from, because Camp Hill wasn't close to Philly, which is where most of the lifers are from. So they would drive all these hours out there. They couldn't do the hour-long visits because it would take them 2-3 hours to get out to the facility. So they would wait and the whole family would come on one day. And the Department of Corrections said that they couldn't screen everybody. And so there was contraband coming in. Drugs continued to come in even after they shut down Family Days, which was their big complaint, right? Family Days is too much contraband coming in, all this other stuff. And it's just not true. Families just wanted to see, they wanted to have that connection with especially with the lifers that they didn't get to see but once a year.
It was the only day that a lifer could spend uninterrupted hours with their family. The only time. For some people, that was the only visit they ever had in years. And they took it away. And then they wonder why people was pissed off. But they cannot give you a case of someone that ever got caught bringing in drugs. Mainly all the drugs that was coming into SCI Camp Hill was being bought in by the guards. I could attest to that. I was a drug dealer for the guards.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that.
I was a drug dealer for the guards. So, my people never brought me drugs like that. It was the guards. Here you go. I'm going to give you a package. You sell half and you keep half. Half is mine, half is yours. And I had to worry about getting busted in jail because I had the protection of a guard. If the guard thought that somebody else was coming to my cell, I get, they're coming to search your cell. So whatever contraband you got, get it out. We were drug dealers for guards. So it was no reason for them to say, we're taking the family fun days away. That was just them being vindictive because 2 individuals 2 years prior to that got beat up in the hole, which is solitary confinement. Charges were filed, and Camp Hill was forced to terminate a few guards. And them guards was lit. They did not appreciate that. because they felt that the administration was taking the side of the inmates.
They allowed you to keep half of the drugs. Was that something that you could use for your own personal exchange with other prisoners?
No, absolutely. It was a get money hustle. It was a way for me to say, you know what? I could sell a whole bundle of dope in 10 minutes. A bundle of dope back then had 12 bags. 12 bags, $100 a bag in the prison. I gave the guard half of his money, and it kept on. It was kept on. But for the guards to say that that's the reason they eliminated the family funding is bullshit. Because we were drug dealers for the guards. They bought in the fucking drugs, not my people. Where the fuck my people gonna bring 2 pounds of marijuana into a jail? Where? What sandwich? What Philly cheesesteak my people could bring 2 pounds of marijuana in? I mean, let's keep it 100. The only way you get that amount of drug in the jail is if a guard bring it in. But again, you have to listen to the podcast, right? Because it gets even deeper than that. It gets deeper than that. You know, they like to throw all the dirt. Well, I'm telling you the dirt. Yeah, we was drug dealers in the jail. But who we sold drug for? We sold drug for the security, for the captain of security. He knew we was having sex with the guards. He knew. There were certain guards, they knew what we was doing, and they knew that we were selling drugs for certain guards, so they didn't bother us. Camp Hill is going to be something that I think we're going to have to do like 3, 4, 5 parts to it after this, because it's going to bring in question, are we as a society spending all this money in correction for what? For what? Because all it takes is one bad guard to corrupt the rest of the guards. They're no different than the police. One. But mainly, all the drug dealer guards were either neo-Nazi or some of the old head Klan members that was in Camp Hill. I mean, how crazy that is. I ain't going back into the history, right? But yeah, we were selling guards for the white guards, because Camp Hill at that time only had 2 black guards. They really had no power, you know. But there's a multitude of things, and I think that when you start investigating and reading the DOC's file, you start being like, wow, because they only talk about Camp Hill. The after effect of Camp Hill was how they killed that guy in Gratis Fall, how they shipped all of us to the federal system. That's a whole different story, you know. You got kids, 16, 17-year-old kids doing time in Leavenworth prison because Camp Hill sent you there. I ended up in 4 federal prisons, Lewisburg, Atlanta, and you know, in the 80s, I was there when Cubans just finished burning Atlanta down. They put us in there, and from Atlanta, I went to Texarkana, Texas, Reno, Oklahoma, and then I ended up in Leavenworth, Kansas. Shit, I felt like Osama bin Laden. I was like, what the heck I'm taking a tour in the federal prison system for? You know, so what we want to do, death by incarceration, is educate the public and let them know that a Camp Hill could happen at any time, anywhere, in any prison in America. Because no matter how much certainties you got, no matter how many plastic toys you got, how many shields you get, at the end of the day, the prisoners outnumbers the guards.
How many episodes are you producing for this series on Camp Hill?
Well, we probably going to do 8. But, you know, if the demand is higher, we got enough material to keep this thing going, you know, because there's more riots that we probably want to investigate and what caused these riots.
Great.
You know, because I think America needs to know that prisoners don't go in and start thinking we just going to start a riot. That's not how it goes.
And when does this series start airing?
We've got some stuff going on with this it's a little different. It's not really part of our regular content. So there's some other interested parties that want to maybe come in and do, like, be producers or whatever. We're gonna have to see. It's complicated right now, but there's, you know, so far it's just been kind of us just doing this with our free time.
Hopefully, if God willing, we will have something early February, late February. But it's going to, listen, like I said, man, we've been working at this for a while. It's not just gonna be something we did in a week. There's a lot of research went into this, a lot of work, because we want the people to really, really get into it have conversations, create groups. We want family members. We want guards. We invite other correctional officers to join the conversation. If you feel that you wasn't represented, let's have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. And we talking about anybody across the penal system in America.
My closing comment, aside from the first episode that we listened to is fantastic, is I really love how the team that is making this isn't just telling the story about a prison riot and making it into a salacious tale of violence. You're actually hoping that people will learn something from it, like what the repercussions economically and the ripple effects are, and why these things were done. Why was this something that the guards and administrative staff wanted to have happen so that it doesn't happen in the future? Because a lot of people will think those are violent criminals. Of course it's going to happen in the future. But if they're educated in it and they're able to communicate their concern to whoever is representing their state or their city or whatever, that's the education that is needed in order for these things to change from a grassroots level, like an everyday person level. And that's all I have to say about that.
Agreed. Well, and then I think in kind of like you asked if we're going to do stuff on more riots, I'll tell you one thing that's on the list right now is deaths in custody, because there's been a rise in those in two cities specifically, Cleveland and Houston, at specific jails. And we've got a local public media reporter in Cleveland that wants to partner with Death by Incarceration and do a little doc series on what's going on in Cleveland. So there's a lot of stuff out there. And because of our new connections with journalists, because of Suave's win with the Pulitzer, with the IDA award, people are taking him more seriously, which means people are reaching out to us to do these kinds of partnerships.
I don't want people to forget that if it wasn't for Crawlspace, Death by Incarceration still be looking for a house, because we very much consider Crawlspace part of our home. So I just want to put that out there because they bringing it.
Well, we appreciate that.
We really do. Thank you so much, Suave Gonzalez and Kevin McCracken, the team behind Death by Incarceration. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We really appreciate your time.
Peace.